Welcome, y'all. Thank you all for staying with us. What time is it? It's 2 o'clock here in Texas. Thank you all seriously for joining us for this very, very, very important, critical, necessary. If I could send it out to all attendees, I would have been like, this is one that is a requirement for We Give Some. But no, seriously, y'all, thank y'all so much. This is going to be an amazing interactive session. Joining us, Strengthening Democracy, Collective Giving for Voter Engagement this year and beyond, which falls up under our time bucket of the 5 T's of philanthropy. And so just quick housekeeping, y'all been here, closed captioning is available and can be enabled at the bottom of your screen chat. I am Taisha Ty Wilson, she, her. I am the Senior Director of Community here at Philanthropy Together. And y'all should know us by now. We're all in the midst of scale and strengthening collective giving practices globally. And so we're just very appreciative for y'all for being here. I should warn y'all though, I'm gonna be at this session and the next one, because these 2 sessions are truly my passion. I'm passionate about politics and I'm passionate about local change. And so I hope y'all would double back, stay for this session and then come back for the fun, the grassroots sessions too, because they go hand in hand to me. Let me level set real quick and catch my breath and try not to get too deep, but I'm gonna get deep for a second. Y'all, we are in a critical election year. We really are. And we are in a very political, polarized state as a nation, as a world. Americans, though, we do seem to agree on one thing, one underlying issue, that there is a collective and a deep worry over the state of our democracy in real life and how the outcome of this presidential election will affect our future. I'm a mama of 5, so my heart races when I even thinking about this election season, because it's personal, it's real to us. We just seem to disagree. Where the disagreement is over who's going to be the candidate and who's going to pose the highest, greatest threat. Y'all heard it, right? We're going to vote for the lesser of the 2 evils. I actually hate that. I hate that sometimes, but it's just the state of where we are. And I know I'm talking about the US, but since elections are happening worldwide, y'all, I'm sure that this friction of what I'm saying right now really reigns true globally. So, but keeping it here in the States, a poll from the Associated Press, the Center for Public Affairs Research, found that 62% of adults say that democracy in the US could be at risk depending on who wins the next election. That's the truth. So majorities on the Democratic side, 72%, Republicans are at 55%. All of us feel that kind of same way, but for different reasons. And against that backdrop, the poll found that about half of US adults, 51% of us, say that democracy is not working too well, if not well at all. I know it's exhausting. I'm with y'all in solidarity. I'm with y'all hearts and mind, but I promise you, it's not the time for us to be disencouraged all the way. We have to show up. We got each other and we must fight, y'all, for our democracy. It's so important for our babies, for us right now, and our children's children. What we do and where we stand in this moment and where we are right now, it matters. And so that's why my face is hot. I get real passionate about this. I always say that the issues that we are fighting collectively, y'all, can be won with organization and the ballot. And so the ballot is a very powerful tool for us, especially as organizers in this movement for good, especially for collective giving groups. And so I challenge you all. And the speakers here today, we have the amazing Brian Miller, Executive Director of NonprofitVOTE, and Christian Arana, who is the Vice President of Civic Power and Policies at the Latino Community Foundation. We collectively, us 3, invite you all to consider the ways today during this session, the ways in how we're going to organize around the ballot and activate the power of our vote to advance social change in our communities. This session, Strengthening Democracy, Collective Giving for Voter Engagement, is so important, and we're going to explore all those ways. And before I turn it on over, I'm going to stop this TED Talk. Before I turn it on over to Brian and Christian, I want to lift up that the data supports, y'all, that collective giving is an direct on-ramp for continued civic engagement. So the work that we're doing as organizers helps people to move them into our democracy. Okay, so it all matters. So with that, Brian, Christian, thank y'all, brothers, for being here, for the work that y'all are doing to strengthen our democracy. Y'all could be doing something else, but you're not. You helping us today in this moment. And so we see y'all. And thank you for lending your time and your voice and your expertise. And with that, we're listening.
Thank you, Ty, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of this conversation and the We Give Summit and everything that Philanthropy Together is doing to move this conversation forward. So thank you again. As Ty noted, and also thank you to Christian, Christian Arana with the Latino Community Foundation, who's I'm honored to share the stage with Christian today, and we're going to have hopefully a really good conversation about what giving circles and philanthropy in general can do to support a more robust and inclusive democracy. And a little bit at first, I want to give a general overview about one of the things that really catalyzed this conversation is this thing called the Philanthropy for Voter Engagement Initiative. Before we do that, we wanted to get a sense of who's in the room. And so if everyone could, in the chat, share your name, the organization you're with, and what city you're in. And if you're outside of the United States, what country you're messaging in from. And so thank you. And Christian, did you want to say anything before I jump into the presentation?
No, just other than thankful to be here. I see people still trickling in. And a big appreciation to the team at Philanthropy California for putting this together. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you. So the Philanthropy for Voter Engagement is an initiative that NonprofitVOTE has been driving in partnership with the Council on Foundations, United Philanthropy Forum, as well as Independent Sector, which I'll talk a little bit about in just a second. First, though, a little bit about NonprofitVOTE. And I had that slide. There we go. We are a national resource organization, and our primary purpose is to assist nonprofits across the country with building out nonpartisan voter engagement programs that engage the clients and the communities that they serve. So we do these free national webinars on staying nonpartisan, running effective voter engagement initiatives, along with a robust online resource library. We do a lot of tailored support for larger national organizations. We do run a field program. It's not which we use partially to test out all of the strategies that we're implementing, that we're suggesting, but also, to pull data from and measure the effectiveness of the program. We are the back-end managers of National Voter Registration Day, which is the nation's largest civic holiday to get folks registered to vote ahead of Election Day. It's a very collaborative holiday. We're just the back-end managers of it. And of course, the purpose of today is really talking about this Philanthropy for Voter Engagement Initiative. And what animates our work, and I know a lot of the folks here in the room, is gaps in voter participation. And when I say gaps, I'm talking about there are whole segments of the population, younger voters, low-income voters, communities of color, that are underrepresented at the ballot box. And there's a myriad of reasons why that is the case, but the biggest part of it that I've seen is really who is and is not being contacted about voting. It's exacerbated by political alienation and things like that. But the big problem that we have in our society is that the economics of political campaigns actually perpetuate and worsen this gap. And follow me on this, it's not that they're malicious. I mean, their goal is to win an election. That's their whole reason for existing. Their goal is not to foster an inclusive electorate. And so they're going to make economic decisions around how they allocate their limited resources, right? And they're going to focus on contacting likely voters. And that really fuels that feedback loop you see at the right, is that for various reasons, certain people have not voted in the past. As a result, they're labeled as unlikely voters. When campaigns make resource allocation decisions and organize their initiatives, they contact folks that are likely voters. They don't spend a lot of money contacting unlikely voters. As a result, those people don't vote. They're labeled once again as unlikely, and this cycle keeps on repeating itself over and over and over again, which raises the question, how do we break that cycle, and how do we break out of this and create a new paradigm where all voices are a part of the process? And that's where we're really leaning into the power of nonprofits and the philanthropies that support them and the giving circles that make the work of those nonprofits possible. And first and foremost, nonprofits have a mission that is better aligned to an inclusive democracy. They want their community to vote and be heard in the process, regardless of their previous voting history, right? It's not about winning an election in November. It's about, are the people who come into my food pantry, do they have a seat at the table? And that's what their goal is. And so they also have long-term roots, established relationships, that trust with that community, cultural competency. And importantly, the data shows it works. Earlier this year, about a month or so ago, we released a report called the Nonprofit Power Report, which looked at about 7,000 voters across 8 states that were registered to vote or pledged to vote or otherwise engaged at any number of 100 plus food pantries, housing clinics, community health centers, and other nonprofit agencies. And 2 of the really clear findings of that report is that first and foremost, no surprise, nonprofits reach underrepresented voters. They're 2.5 times as likely to be low income as voters in the broader community. They're more likely to be young, more likely to be voters of color, et cetera. But even more importantly is that the engagement of those nonprofits had a significant positive impact on turnout. Voters that were engaged at nonprofits voted at rates 10 percentage points higher than other voters in the same communities, comparable voters. And there was even bigger gains among underrepresented voters. So low-income voters saw like a 15 percentage point boost and so forth. And despite being so incredibly effective, excuse the misspelling of effective up there, at voter engagement, only about 20% of nonprofits across the country do voter engagement work with the communities that they serve. And even fewer foundations are directly supporting that voter engagement work. And that's what we want to change. We want to create a space where more foundations are doing this work and more nonprofits are doing this work and more foundations are supporting that work. And that's where the Philanthropy for Voter Engagement Toolkit came from. And so, again, as I mentioned, we have some partners we're working with. We interviewed about 30 or so foundations and identified a host of best practices, common strategies. We worked with our legal counsel to put together a really good legal guidelines for foundations on where the lines are so folks can better understand where to move. We compiled a bunch of resources, sample grant language, and more, and a bunch of case studies where you can dig in and hear more about how a foundation made this program real. Before I get into that, just a real quick level set on terminology. People use voter engagement and civic engagement interchangeably, but they're different the way we view it. Voter engagement is really about election-related activity to help voters participate in the process. Everything from voter registration to get out to vote drives to ballot measure work. When we say civic engagement, we're including all that voter engagement, but also lobbying, advocacy, volunteering, census work, which are all important. But for purposes of this session, we're really focusing on the voter engagement side of that work. And real quick, 3 things I just wanted to say. There's 3 basic rules that are important that we'll talk a little bit more about as the session goes on. The first one is the staying nonpartisan. And bottom line is foundations, giving circles, nonprofits can support a wide range of nonpartisan voter engagement. From get out to vote, to learning what's on the ballot, to voter engagement. You can drive people to the polls, it's fine. Everything short of telling people who to vote for or suggesting who they should vote for and who they should vote against. That's when it becomes partisan. And so that's really the important bright line to keep in mind is you can't endorse or oppose a candidate, but you can absolutely help folks register and get involved in the process. The second set of rules is there's a set of rules around voter registration. Now, to be clear, this does not apply to get out to vote. It does not apply to voter education. It doesn't apply to pledge to vote drives. Very specifically, voter registration drives. There are some special rules that private foundations need to be aware of. Not applicable to community foundations, and I know a lot of giving circles use community foundations to manage their giving. As such, you don't need to worry so much about that. For community foundations can support and conduct nonpartisan voter registration drives as long as it's nonpartisan without limit. Private foundations can only support voter registration drives if it's done in 5 or more states across multiple election cycles and so forth. That said, they can provide general support grants to nonprofits, and the nonprofits can use some of that money for voter registration. It just can't be earmarked in the grant for voter registration, right? The last rule is really about, or the set of rules is really about ballot measures. And ballot measures, unlike candidates, ballot measures are considered lobbying. So taking a position for or against a ballot measure is not endorsing or oppose a candidate. It's supporting or opposing a policy. And therefore it's considered lobbying. So community foundations can endorse and oppose ballot measures. They can provide grants to do so. It just has to count towards their lobbying limits. Private foundations have a lot more restrictions around this. So there's less movement that a private foundation can do around ballot measure advocacy. And all that said, there's a bunch of strategies and best practices that this toolkit lifts up. I'm not going to go into all of them, but here's some of the bigger ones: is providing funding early and consistently. There was an all by April initiative that one of our partners ran, which we were very much in support of. But of course, we're encouraging people to continue giving to support this voter engagement work, but also giving over multiple years, being consistent about that giving, so it's not too episodic. The second thing is to bring on staff. If it's a community foundation, a lot of community foundations are hiring staff out of the organizing world that know the space, and private foundations that know voter engagement work and know how to fund it effectively. Learning the rules, that's what we just talked about here a second ago with the slides. Thinking expansively. It doesn't just have to include grant making. Grant making is an important part of it, but foundations can host convenings. They can host trainings for their grantees on, learning the legal rules. They can partner with their grantees on town halls. And then lastly, revisiting grant language. The most common mistake I've seen is foundations that put something like, no funds can be used for political activity, which there is no legal definition for the word political activity. And for some people, political activity means voter registration. Voter registration is fine. What the IRS prohibits is partisan political activity. So if you're going to put language in your grant, say you cannot do partisan political activity. Again, we have sample grant language in the toolkits, along with all these case studies, a wealth of different groups that we interviewed and have write-ups on. And you can get the full toolkit here, but I'm not going to talk anymore because I want to turn this over to Christian, who my hope was going to tell us a little bit about how he sees this pan out within the Latino Community Foundation and the giving circles that you work with. Christian.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah. And a big kudos to all the work that you've done, just mobilizing philanthropy in our sector to do more of this work. So just to introduce myself again, Christian Arana, I'm the Vice President of Civic Power and Policy at the Latino Community Foundation. So we are the nation's largest Latino serving foundation. Most recently, we just hired former presidential candidate Julian Castro to lead our organization. So we're very much steeped in this conversation around voter engagement, voter education, voter registration. I'll just share briefly, because I know we'll open up to Q&A and talk more about the giving circles, but everything that Brian just shared, we as an organization went through close to 7 years ago when I actually first started at the foundation. Most community foundations, most people within philanthropy confuse this idea of like this work as politics. It's not politics, it's democracy. And as Brian opened up about, when you look at the numbers, every single election, it seems that the voter registration, the voter turnout gaps get larger and larger and larger between white older folks who tend to generally vote at much higher rates and everyone else, right? And if we're going to move closer to achieving all the policies and all the kinds of budgets that we want our elected officials to pass one day, this process of getting registered, informed, mobilized, engaged is absolutely so critical. So over the last 7 years that I've been leading this work, our foundation has mobilized Latino communities up and down California and soon enough across the nation. It seems like every single day there's another article about the Latino vote, and it's in disarray, and just trying to make sense of the chaos that we're seeing right now, right? But we as a foundation are very much laser focused on making sure that groups on the ground have the resources necessary to not only engage their community, inform them, but give them the tools of making sure that they actually can participate in this democratic process, right? I know Taisha mentioned, I know everyone's very much focused on the big presidential election this fall. But as Sara had actually dropped in the chat, I mean, elections are happening all across the world. There's a big one in Mexico coming up in a couple of weeks. And that's not even mentioning all the local mayor races, US senators, water boards, school districts. There are elections for everything, right? And so making sure that our community is excited and informed to participate in every single election. And more often than not, it's local nonprofits that are the key to making these things happen, right? So I can share more about the giving circles, but I think, were we going to open it up to Q&A? Oh,
We
Brian,
wanted to open it up to the Q&A, but if you want to give the real quick wrap of the giving circles, I think that'd be a good intro.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the levers that we use at the foundation is our Giving Circle network. So our foundation has the largest network of Latino philanthropists all across the country. So as of today, we have about 17 giving circles all across the state of California. Fun fact, I'm actually part of a giving circle down in Los Angeles. So I'm part of the Los Angeles Latino Giving Circle. So these are everyday philanthropists that want to give back to their community, right? Versus just Googling, who can I give money to and give your 25 bucks? You find people, and it's actually more than that, but you can find people who care about the same communities, same issues as you do, right? I know I'm talking to an audience that understands this directly, but like there's something really beautiful about coming together, finding like-minded people, and growing your impact together, right? A $500 gift could be $5,000. With the LA Giving Circle, it's now become 50,000, which is pretty incredible. And so, this network has been not only critical in terms of giving out money, right? Because as Brian talked about, I think people confuse voter engagement as something that happens every 2 years. This needs to happen every single day. And giving circles, when our political parties and candidates historically don't engage us, you all that work with giving circles all across the country, in essence, have become the last best hope for democracy, because you've been a very consistent stream of revenue for a lot of the organizations that need to do this work and who want to do this work, but who just can't find the necessary resources to do it. So I'll share more about how our giving circles have tapped into elections, but I'll say, our foundation is proud to lead this network. I'm even more proud to be a part of the LA Giving Circle because we're a rambunctious bunch, but we try to get the job done.
Thanks, Christian. And we did want to, if folks have questions, we're going to pause very briefly if folks have questions now. Otherwise, we're going to circle back. We are going to have more questions towards the end, but if there's some immediate questions about the work Christian's doing at the Latino Community Foundation or the work I articulated for NonprofitVOTE, go ahead and throw those in the chat. If we don't get to them now, we'll certainly get to them at the end. And while we wait on those folks to come through, I'll throw out, I know folks have said, and we've said that this is it's not just in the US. There's going to be elections. I think 64 countries around the world are having elections this year, including roughly 49% of the global population will be voting this year. So it's going to be one of the biggest years of voting worldwide in our history. And so one question that I had, and I know we asked this earlier, but do we have anyone from outside the US? And I guess what share of the folks, I know Celeste, you were going to look at that when we posted that earlier. Are we looking primarily a US audience, or are there any international folks in the mix? Canada, I see Canada, we got Canada. Okay. All right. Primarily US, okay. So that's it. I did want to, when we talk about the rules around staying nonpartisan, all that stuff about foundations, that's obviously only going to be applicable to the US. I have no idea what the rules are in Canada. I assume it's going to be similar, but you know, I did want to say a few things about the nonpartisan and just to expand on what it means to be nonpartisan, which is, again, there's this thing called the Johnson Amendment. It basically means a nonprofit, which includes foundations, it includes churches, it includes pretty much anyone in that space, cannot endorse or oppose a candidate for public office. You can do almost everything just shy of that. Oh, we do have a question, which I'll circle back to in just a second. But one of the things that's important to remember is that, and there's this one thing that sometimes gets conflated with partisan work, which is who you're registering. And who you're and the point is that the courts have ruled who you're registering doesn't matter. In that you can, as an organization, target an historically underrepresented community, be it Latino voters, be it Black voters, Native American voters. You can target low-income voters and say, we want to make sure all people have a seat at the table and target a specific constituency. That is not partisan. That's about simple inclusivity and promoting equity. And that's hopefully that's a big part of what animates our work. And so it's about, you know, really bringing everyone and ensuring everyone has a seat at the table. So the IRS rules are really specific. It's about endorsing and opposing candidates or endorsing and opposing parties. There is one question. Go ahead. Good, Christian.
Well, yeah, I was gonna answer the question that came in the chat about voting being personal. Yeah, and I guess I can start by answering that question. I mean, what's rather interesting, at least in the context of the state of California, it's never been easier to vote than now, right? We all get mailed in our ballot. You don't have to put a stamp on it. So states like California, and I hope more states make it easier for people to access the ballot box, right? So with time, the excuses for why people don't vote have become less and less and less because like, oh, I didn't have time. Well, you get sent in your ballot. Oh, I don't have a stamp. Well, you don't have to pay for it anymore, right? What's rather interesting to me is that when I talk to people who say this, that what's the point? What difference does it make? When you start that conversation there and help people understand what's at stake in elections from the president all the way down to your local mayor, people start to get it, right? I think as a country, as a globe, we need to do a better job helping people understand how government actually works and how sometimes it doesn't work and how we can change it, right? But once we start that conversation process there, people start to get it, right? I think the other thing that I'll add is, you know, especially in the context of this election in the United States, I mean, there are a lot of people that are frustrated. I think it's important to acknowledge that. You know, we don't want to say to people like, no, like don't have your feelings. You should still get out and vote. I kind of flip it on its head because in essence, when you vote, you kind of choose the people or the person that you want to have a conversation with, who you want to organize with, who you want to influence. And when you're looking at the ballot, who might be that person that you think might take that meeting, that you think might listen to you? Slowly but surely, at least when I talk like that, people have kind of shifted. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis, right? But I hope that might be helpful for a lot of you that have these conversations.
And I just popped up in the chat box, which I'll throw out a comment to myself, and then I was going to throw something back to you, Christian. There's a question about high school students and college students in the U.S. There is a lot of work obviously happening on college campuses across the U.S. With the National Voter Registration Day work that we are managing, we are doing a lot of work, particularly we're trying to focus on community colleges as well and making sure they don't get overlooked, because honestly speaking, community colleges are really where your underrepresented voters end up being. The four-year universities tend to attract a slightly different audience. So we want to make sure that when we focus on college, it isn't just the big universities, that we get all those community colleges and the trade schools engaged as well. And high schools, yes, because there's still a large share of the population that never goes to college. So if your entire voter engagement strategy is about engaging college students, you're going to miss a whole segment of the population. And so engaging folks at the high school level is important. Almost every state in the country allows for people to register to vote when you're 17. In some cases when you're 16. And the rules vary by state. So there's groups like iCivics that are working to get civics introduced in high schools or reintroduced in high schools, and also encouraging a lot of history teachers, civics teachers, social studies to start doing voter registration of their seniors before they leave and before they head off. And so there's a lot of good activity going on, including the work we do with National Voter Registration Day around folks. And Christian, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but also want to make sure we circle back to some of the Giving Circle work that you're doing that I know you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll talk about that, but I'll just make a last mention point on this. So I'm actually on the board of an organization called Power California that work with high school and college age students around the topic of voting. And as I mentioned prior, very difficult conversations, but also very interesting ones too, because a lot of us that come to these conversations, it may be intuitive to us. It's like, oh yeah, I know how to register to vote. You can't take for granted that an 18-year-old kid does. And if you think back as to your own voting story, well, who taught you how to register to vote? Who helped inform you about how to fill out a ballot and turn it in? And I think we're just remembering that. So with respect to our giving circles, as I mentioned, we have 17 giving circles across the state of California. And over the last couple of years, it's been phenomenal because more often than not, as you all understand, giving circles give out money, right? That's what we do. But it's so much more than that. Something that we're really proud at the Latino Community Foundation is that we call our philanthropists civically engaged, right? On the one hand, yes, they come together, figure out their priorities, find the organizations that match those priorities, and give out that money, right? But a lot of our members want to do so much more than that. There's a Giving Circle member, her name's Elizabeth. She's part of our San Francisco Latina Giving Circle. A couple years back in a previous election, she helped mobilize her circle to go with a lot of the grantees that they had just invested in to get out the vote. It's one thing to give. It is really another thing to actually be in community and do the work with the local organization that you're investing in. Our organization say all the time, the money is awesome. We appreciate it. What's actually been invaluable is the time that members have given. And think about it this way, in any given election, you got to reach as many people as possible. How on earth are people going to do that if they don't have an entire team of volunteers to do the phone banking, to send the text messages, to go door to door? What's even more incredibly special about all this is that these are not like fancy people. I mean, sometimes they are, but they come from the community. They look like the community. And we're especially proud that we're organizing people, yes, for money, but also for their time to make sure that they have a role in strengthening our democracy, as Brian was mentioning about. Because more often than not, like, it's on all of us, really. We'll see what happens this November and thereafter, right? I think we start to enter these problems when we remove ourselves from the process, right? You look at any given election, half of us turn out to vote, half. You can only imagine what this country would look like and the policies that they would pass if 75, 80%, 90% of us voted. It would be dramatically different.
And the one thing that I would jump in on that is that one of the things that we've seen, and you can see it in the data, as overall turnout goes down, the gaps get bigger. In local elections and off-cycle elections, it's a wider, older electorate that's actually voting. And so, while gaps is the primary thing that animates us and gets our work going, it is tied very closely to overall turnout. So the closer we get to full turnout, the narrower those gaps tend to be. And so, again, circling back to one of the things that we argued earlier is that a nonprofit, and if a nonprofit looks to, or if a community foundation or giving foundation looks to its mission, our mission is to make sure our community has a seat at the table. That's about inclusive democracy. That's about bringing your people along. And I think playing into what Christian was just saying as far as, time, because that's obviously the theme of this particular session. It's how can folks do their time beyond just treasure. And treasure is obviously important. It allows the work to go on in the giving circles. And so with the giving circles, but with the giving circles, I mean, it's kind of like what we said with the community foundations or a lot of the foundations in the toolkit. Sometimes it is direct grant making. Yes. Sometimes what foundations can do is partner genuinely with their nonprofits in their community to jointly host candidate forums, to again, organize a training. They can bring in outside speakers who are experts in this issue. They can leverage their communications channels and talk up national voter registration or talk up the election, sending election reminders to all their grantees. Hey, this, and even promote things like time off to vote or paid time off to vote. And these, I think, are all a lot of the same things that a giving circle at an individual level could do, is work in genuine partnership with the same groups that you may be funding to see, here's $5,000 we want to give you, but we also want to make our folks available if there's help you need phone banking, if there's help you need organizing for a candidate forum, or whatever those activities are that the community needs. And so we would certainly encourage giving circles to bring that same lens to the table. The treasure is important, absolutely. So is time.
Yeah,
so,
and Brian, if I could add one more thing, and maybe it's a plea actually for a lot of you that do this work. I'm sure many of you have seen headlines around the role of artificial intelligence in this upcoming election. So from misinformation to disinformation, a lot of deep fakes. There's going to be a lot of, for lack of a better word, chaos heading into this election in the United States and across the world, I imagine as well. I don't want us to feel helpless, that just because you're a giving circle member or work with giving circles, that your only responsibility is just to give out money and do phone banking. Those are one of many things that you can do, right? All of us have access to a smartphone. All of us talk to our family members, especially those of us who come from Latin America. We use WhatsApp all the time. Some of the nonsense that my parents send me is scary. And I mention all this because between now and the upcoming election, you all have an incredible power to be the conduits of good information. From your local Secretary of State's office to whatever trusted organization that you work with, how can all of you take the added step to pass over the right website to register to vote or to let people know what their voter rights are? Because unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of dark forces, both within politics and outside of it, that are going to try to suppress a lot of votes of a lot of the communities that we care about, right? And, at least for myself, a lot of the cousins that I know, it takes me a couple minutes to say, hey, are you registered to vote? Go to this website, because this is where you can do it, right? It really, and I really harp on this point about how giving circles are the last best hope for democracy, because ultimately it's at the individual level, right? But then when it becomes the collective, it's just incredible how that flourishes. And then we start to see the numbers go up, right? In terms of voter registration, voter turnout. So I would make a plug for that, for a lot of you, that artificial intelligence, and that you could all be good at providers of information.
There's a question that I see Celeste pass over to me, which says, I'm going to just read the question. I love the reframing of the conversation towards strengthening democracy. Can we acknowledge and address the harmful narrative of non-participation, shift to non-partisan, and of can't get political, shift everything is political, shift and motivate to strengthening democracy? I think that's, I've already kind of made the point a couple of ways, and maybe Christian would want to elaborate on what that means for him. But for us, it's like, we all talk about equity, right? We all talk about equity, inclusion, and in us, we're looking at it through our democracy through that same lens. Is our democracy, and there's also some really good framing and messaging that we can talk about. And I forget the group, they did some polling work and came up with some messaging like, our democracy works better when more people participate and vote. and it's a hard argument for anyone to dispute. And so I think the more we can anchor our principles in things that are universal like that, universal values, our democracy works better when more people participate and vote. That's why we're making sure these underrepresented voters have a seat at the table. Our democracy works better when more people participate and vote. So we're ensuring that the clients who come through our agencies get the information about registering to vote. If someone disagrees with the principle about our democracy works better when more people participate and vote, then we've got real problems. But I think the more we can anchor and reframe this about, it's not about, you know, Biden or Trump or anything like that. It's about our democracy is going to work better when more people participate and vote, period. End of story. That's all it is. And to do that, we need to target underrepresented voters and bring them into the process. To do that, we need to do this. And I think also it helps to also take the lens off of the presidency and also focus on down ballot races. There's ballot measures. There's all sorts of other stuff. That's just, it's the top of the ticket, yes, but there's a whole lot of other races, as we've said before. It's not about that race. It's about a long-term value framework. And it's what we continuously anchor our work in. And Christian, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'll just reiterate the point that I made earlier about how it cannot just be about the presidential election in either country, right? More often than not, your local mayor probably is more important than whoever the next president of the United States. And even then, I'll even go more local than that. In some communities in the state of California who don't have access to clean water, whoever runs that irrigation board district is probably more important than whether it's Biden versus Trump, right? And so, you know, and again, I mean, this is another plea for you all. It's it is about a democracy. It cannot just be about figureheads. It's about making sure that we are giving our folks the tools, right? Which is why giving art, especially the Giving Circles and Art Network, have been that consistent stream of revenue for these local organizations. This work cannot happen at scale if we don't invest in these organizations. I also don't want people to work for free. You know, this should be work that should build a career for folks, right? And just doubling, if not quadrupling down on what Brian was talking about, how we arrive at better decisions and better policy when more folks have an opportunity to participate. When people, as Brian was mentioning, in essence, don't want us to participate, it's purely for selfish reasons, right? But all of us who are guardians of our democracy, you know, we need to make sure that we at least give our folks the opportunity and the chance to be a part of that process. I think you're back on mute, Brian.
I know we want to circle back. There's a couple of AI questions that I think we wanted to circle back to. But before we do that, I wanted to point out something that Vicky just posted in here, the vote411.org. This is really important. And we've found that in local elections, particularly, and in down ballot races, it is lack of information that is one of the biggest reasons people don't vote. You know, and so it's really important that we push out information about unbiased, nonpartisan information like Vote 411, like Ballotpedia or Ballot, you know, there's a number of different tools that help people understand what's on the ballot before they get to the polls, who's on the ballot, ballot measures. So that voter education work is extremely important in local elections because, you know, but even in presidential election years like this, it's important for the down ballot races because absent that information, people are going to vote at the top of the ticket and they're going to stop. They're not going to vote any further down. And so it's important to provide people with the tools so that they can feel like they can make an informed decision. Anyway, so there was another question about the Chat GPT. Someone said something, and Christian, I know you've spoken a bit about this, and if you want to elaborate a little bit more, I'll just say one thing that we're doing, at least on the nonprofit vote side, you know, is we've always had misinformation in elections, right? People have always tried to mislead people and put out confusing information. It's just this year it's going to be on steroids. Thanks to the power of AI, it's like they can crank out so much information at such volume and such convincing misinformation that it is going to be challenging for us to combat. We are, with the National Voter Registration Aid, partnering with you know, the Trusted Info, the NAS, the election directors are trying to encourage people to go to vote.gov, look for that .gov address when in doubt, if you're trying to find good information on elections. But also I would encourage you, if you see anything coming across your social media feed that looks suspect, run it through Snopes, check it before ever retweeting it, because there's a fair chance it might be, we don't want to be a party to helping spread bad information. But
Yeah. And I'll address that point in the context of giving circles in the sense that each of us that are part of a giving circle are also part of several other networks, right? Whether it's your local PTA or your local Chamber of Commerce. At the Latino Community Foundation, we have something called the Latinos in Tech Giving Circle. So these are Latinos that work at all these big tech companies all across the Bay Area. When I talk about how our members are civically engaged, it's also like, hey, I know you work at Google. Why don't you go talk to your boss to make sure that whatever AI tools that you're doing, that that we're not promoting bad news or anything of the like, right? It's been a work in progress, I'll admit, working with our members at these companies, right? But I make that point because again, we're not helpless. I know ChatGPT, AI are big concerns. If you're working with a local nonprofit, I would ask, like, do you have a policy around this? Like, when would you want to use this kind of technology and for what? How will it be used? I think coming together and answering those questions will start to help the conversation a little bit more about how we incorporate this technology and especially in the service of our democracy, right? I'll admit, I'm also still trying to figure it out. AI is a deeply complex subject. I didn't go to school for computer science or anything like that. But I don't want to use that as an excuse to not get involved. And so if it is the case that, your local giving circle may need to invest in helping get local nonprofits get more literacy around AI, then let's do it, right? Because again, it's this election, but there's going to be several more. It's also going to be the census, other major civic opportunities. I would much rather have us start to admit that we don't know enough now so that we can better start mobilizing to get all the questions answered to better prepare us for subsequent civic moments in the next couple of years.
Hey, Christian, I know we are going to go ahead and tie this up. And I think we're going to go ahead and give each of us a chance to say a couple of quick words to closing before we turn it back over to Ty, or Kelsey, rather. Anything you wanted to say?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to Philanthropy together. And with you, Brian. Yeah, Brian's the man. I look at stuff all the time. I always joke that if I didn't use Brian's things, I'd probably be in election jail right now. So a major plug for you, Brian, your work. But yeah, please reach out with any questions. Yeah, and if anything, I'll just say it for the third time. Don't be helpless. We all have more power than we think, and I want us to use it in this upcoming election.
Thank you, Christian. And Kelsey just posted one of the things I was going to say is that if thank you again to the summit for the We Give Summit for hosting this conversation and having both Christian and I on this really important discussion to be had. I do encourage everyone there's two websites I would encourage you to go to. One is the one that you see there in the chat box, philanthropy.nonprofitvote.org, which will bring you to that Philanthropy for Voter Engagement Toolkit. Again, it highlights a lot of the legal guidelines, best practices, case studies of foundations that are out here doing good work to support a more inclusive democracy, support voter engagement within their grantees and respective networks. Not just with treasure, but also with time. Again, jointly hosting events with their grantees and partnering in a more genuine way. The other website is, of course, nonprofitvote.org. For many of you who are involved in your nonprofit vote and a nonprofit or just want to attend as an individual, we have tons of resources on the page on everything from, again, staying nonpartisan to how to run an effective get out to vote campaign. And this is all important work. And thank you again to the summit for hosting this conversation. I believe we're turning it over to Kelsey at this point.
Yes, you are. Thank you, Brian and Christian. What they don't know is that I used to work in politics. So boy, have I heard this conversation so many times. And I think the big takeaway for me, and Christian, I really feel like you nailed this down super well, is that, like my shirt says, another world is possible. And voting is one of those mechanisms and levers that we as community members and activists can use to really build the future that we deserve. I know it's easy to get stressed out and overrun by the world, but yet again, it's another lever, and we need all the levers that we can get to really build the world of the future.